On January 6, 2021, after the Trump mob attacked the Capitol, Tim Cook, the conscientious CEO of Apple, reached into his conscience and presumably the conscience of the company he runs and said this: "Today marks a sad and shameful chapter in our nation's history. Those responsible for this insurrection should be held to account, and we must complete the transition to President-elect Biden's administration. It's especially when they are challenged that our ideals matter most. Those responsible for this insurrection should be held to account." Today, Tim Cook met with the person responsible, Donald Trump, in Donald Trump's first return to Capitol Hill since he incited the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Tim Cook's meeting with Donald Trump today was arranged by a business lobbying group in Washington that calls itself the Business Roundtable. Companies pay big money to be members of the Business Roundtable, which in turn lobbies for those companies, in addition to all the individual lobbying work done by the law firms and lobbyists that companies like Apple hire by the dozens in Washington. And this guy met with Donald Trump today in Donald Trump's return to Capitol Hill.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president.
Donald Trump did not set foot in the Capitol today or on government property because his meetings were presidential campaign meetings. They were held off campus from the Capitol, first with Republican members of the House and then the Business Roundtable and then Republican members of the Senate. Republican Senators Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, who voted to convict Donald Trump in his last impeachment trial in the Senate, did not attend the Republican senators' meeting with Donald Trump, but Mitt Romney and Bill Cassidy, who also voted to convict Donald Trump in his last impeachment trial, did attend the meeting with Donald Trump today. NBC News caught up with Senator Romney on his way to the Trump meeting.
Do you plan on confronting him or bringing up any kind of January 6th related issue?
No, this is not the place for that.
No, this is not the place for that. That is the very polite version of the ultra-polite Utah Senator Mitt Romney. Maybe too polite this time. What is the place for that? One place for that is the federal courthouse, a short walk from where they were meeting, where Donald Trump was scheduled to stand trial for crimes Special Prosecutor Jack Smith has accused him of committing leading up to and on January 6th. But the Republican Supreme Court blocked that trial by imposing an extraordinarily long delay in deciding an appeal by Donald Trump that they never should have accepted, in which Donald Trump is claiming something that no president and no lawyer and no judge has ever claimed before, that the president of the United States has lifetime immunity for any and all crimes committed while he was president of the United States. Andrew Weissmann will join us tonight to consider the unconscionable delay that the Supreme Court has imposed on the criminal case of United States of America versus Donald J. Trump. This is not the place for that. This is not the place for Republicans or anyone else to stand up to Donald Trump. That's what they thought today. Even a senator like Mitt Romney, who knows that Donald Trump hates him because Mitt Romney voted guilty in both of Donald Trump's Senate impeachment trials.
Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy.
This is not the place for that. It is also not the place for any exhibition of male ego by anyone other than Donald Trump. And it is impossible to overstate just how peculiar that is, as our first guest tonight, the first woman Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, can attest. There are many forces that make the wheels of power turn in Washington: political convenience, policy goals sometimes, ambition. But throughout the history of the Republic, there has been no force more consistent than male ego. And so one of the most fascinating things to observe in the Republican senators' public adoration of Donald Trump is the complete and utter collapse of male ego in a place that used to be run on the fuel of male ego. The oldest senator, 90-year-old Chuck Grassley, was in the meeting with Donald Trump today. When I was working in the Senate, Chuck Grassley had a rough-edged ego that was often activated as a cover for his chronic ignorance. The ignorance has expanded, and the ego of Chuck Grassley has evaporated. And then there is Senator Rafael Edward Cruz. Donald Trump attacked Senator Cruz's father, lied about Senator Cruz's father being involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. Donald Trump attacked Senator Cruz's wife, Heidi. Donald Trump ridiculed the way she looks. And here is what the outraged candidate for president, Senator Cruz, said about that then.
Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
Donald Trump alleges that my dad was involved in assassinating JFK. Now, let's be clear. This is nuts.
There was real suspense then going into the 2016 Republican convention about whether or not the deeply offended Senator Cruz would even endorse Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president. But Senator Cruz looked into his heart and found nothing. Nothing that would prevent him from endorsing the presidential candidate who attacked and lied about his father and attacked and lied about his wife. And there was Senator Cruz today in that lineup of utterly egoless Republican men craving their moment with Donald Trump, craving a possible handshake or a possible pat on the back or a wink or a smile, a glance, anything from Donald Trump. Watch now, Senator Cruz crave that moment after Donald Trump passes by Senator Cruz and pays more attention to other, more obscure people in the room. He kept clapping after Donald Trump left the room. After the door was closed, did he think Donald Trump could see through the door? Today, the President of the United States was doing the nation's business in Italy at a meeting of the G7 countries, including a meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky, in which the President signed a 10-year security agreement with Ukraine. President Biden and President Zelensky took questions from reporters.
Today, during the G7 meeting, the discussion focused on developing Ukraine's air defense system based on the most advanced Western complexes and also on enhancing long-range capabilities. So my question is, can you provide any details on the initiative and about the readiness of our allies to take part in it? Thank you.
I'd be happy to respond to that. We have acquired commitment from 5 countries so far for Patriot batteries and other air defense systems, as well as we've let it be known to those countries that are expecting from us air defense systems in the future that they're going to have to wait. Everything we have is going to go to Ukraine until their needs are met, and then we'll make good on the commitments we made to other countries.
Donald Trump could not understand that question or that answer. The president, who is only 3 years older than his Republican challenger but is accused of being too old for his job, has now flown across the Atlantic 3 times in the last week and will fly back across the Atlantic from this European meeting all the way to Los Angeles, where he will be joined in a campaign fundraiser by President Barack Obama, George Clooney, and Julia Roberts. Today, the Biden-Harris campaign released this ad.
On January 6th, Donald Trump lit a fire in this country.
140 officers were injured. The siege lasted for 7 hours.
Stoking the flames of division and hate. Now he's pouring gasoline.
They were unbelievable patriots.
Pledging to pardon the extremists who tried to overthrow our government.
We will give them pardons.
Inciting them to try again. There is nothing more sacred than our democracy. But Donald Trump's ready to burn it all down.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.